They promised forever. They whispered love until the night turned silent. But behind every embrace was jealousy, betrayal, and a choice that would turn romance into bloodshed. These are 10 stories where love wasn't broken, it was buried. Welcome to the Crime O'Clock, where every heartbeat has a ticking timeline waiting to be uncovered. 1. The Valentine's Day confession. She was the kind of woman everyone envied. Graceful, magnetic, and adored by a husband who seemed to worship her. On February 14th, 2014, Emma Caldwell posted a picture online. Roses, champagne, and a caption that read, "To my one and only." Hours later, she was dead. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. Her body was found in her car on the outskirts of Atlanta, her phone missing, her jewelry still on. But detectives soon noticed something strange. The car keys were neatly placed in the cup holder, and the seat had been pushed back, as though someone taller had been driving. Her husband, Daniel, was the first to call 911. His voice shook as he told police his wife hadn't come home. He waited in their living room, surrounded by wedding photos, insisting he had been planning a surprise dinner when she vanished. But inconsistencies began to surface. Timestamps, phone pings, a deleted text that read only, "We can't keep doing this." Investigators recovered that message from Emma's cloud backup. It was sent not to Daniel, but to her co-worker, Dr. Ryan Mercer, a man she'd met 6 months earlier at a charity gala. Co-workers had noticed their chemistry. Too many late nights at the hospital, too many private smiles. When detectives questioned Ryan, he admitted the affair, but swore he hadn't seen her in weeks. Then came the turning point. Traffic cam footage showed Emma's car following Ryan's sedan out of the city just after 9 p.m. Valentine's night. The footage alone wasn't enough, but what detectives found next shattered his story. A florist receipt from that day listed 2 identical bouquets purchased under his name. One delivered to Emma's home, the other to his apartment. Under interrogation, Ryan broke down. He claimed the affair had spiraled out of control, that Emma wanted to leave her husband, and that she'd threatened to expose everything when he refused. "She said I'd lose everything," he whispered. She wouldn't stop. According to his confession, their final meeting erupted into a fight. In a flash of anger, he grabbed her by the throat. When she stopped moving, panic took over. He staged the car scene to look like a robbery, then drove home and deleted every message between them. In court, his defense painted him as a man pushed past reason by obsession. The jury saw something else, a man who had mistaken control for love. Ryan Mercer was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Emma's husband never remarried. Each Valentine's Day, he places a single white rose on her grave. The card reads only, "For my one and only," because sometimes love doesn't fade, it kills. Case 2. The honeymoon murder. The ocean glimmered like glass that morning, calm and endless. For newlyweds Mark and Alyssa Daniels, it was supposed to be the beginning of forever. 10 perfect days in paradise, celebrating the love they'd waited years to make official. Their social media feeds overflowed with sunset selfies, champagne toasts, and captions that read, "Happily ever after." But by the 5th night, that fairy tale had drowned in the turquoise waters of Bora Bora. Alyssa never came back from her midnight swim. When resort staff found Mark pacing the beach, his voice was trembling. He told police they had gone out for a moonlit dip, that a sudden current had pulled her under. He tried to save her, he said, but the ocean was too strong. He wept as he spoke, his shirt torn, his hands shaking. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, the kind that sometimes follows paradise. But the story began to unravel almost immediately. For one thing, there was no current that night. The water had been eerily still. And when Alyssa's body was recovered 2 miles down the coast, her lungs told a different story. She hadn't drowned at all. The autopsy revealed bruising on her neck, faint but undeniable. There were small abrasions on her wrists and traces of blood beneath her nails. The cause of death, strangulation. Investigators returned to the resort and searched the couple's bungalow. There, inside Mark's luggage, they found something chilling, a printed copy of Alyssa's life insurance policy. It had been updated just 2 weeks before the wedding. The beneficiary, Mark Daniels. The payout, $2 million. When detectives confronted him, his calm collapsed. He denied everything, insisted the bruises were from their rough play. But the evidence mounted quickly. The resort's cameras showed him leaving their room alone at 1:47 a.m., hours before he claimed they went swimming. Staff recalled him ordering room service for 1 at 2 a.m. and appearing strangely composed. The deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. Before the marriage, Mark had been drowning in debt. Gambling, credit cards, a failed business venture. Alyssa, by contrast, was a financial planner, careful, steady, and well-insured. She had paid for the entire honeymoon herself. During the trial, prosecutors revealed a text Alyssa had sent her sister just hours before her death. "Something's off with Mark tonight. He's quiet, strange. I can't shake the feeling he's hiding something." Mark's defense tried to argue stress, fatigue, confusion, anything but murder. But the timeline was airtight. He had planned every detail: the destination, the timing, the policy. Even the romantic midnight swim had been a script. When the verdict was read, guilty of first-degree murder, Mark stared straight ahead, expressionless. The jury recommended life without parole. The resort where it happened still exists, though that bungalow is no longer listed for guests. Locals say the sea there is unusually calm, as if holding its breath. Every year on their anniversary, Alyssa's family visits the shoreline. They scatter white petals into the surf, watching as the waves carry them out to where she vanished. A friend once said of Alyssa, she believed love could fix anything. But some loves aren't broken. They're poison from the start. And in paradise, poison always finds a way to surface. Case 3. The composer's last song. The piano sat silent in the middle of the living room, its keys dusted with rose petals from the night before. Outside, the streetlights still glowed faintly, illuminating the rain that hadn't stopped since dawn. Inside that apartment, a man lay motionless on the floor. Once a musical genius, now the final note in a love story turned symphony of deceit. Ethan Ward was a name every critic in New York knew. A concert pianist, composer, and darling of the classical world, his rise had been meteoric. He was brilliant, charismatic, and haunted, the kind of man whose talent made his flaws seem romantic. When he met Mia Laurent, a gifted violinist fresh from Paris, the pairing felt like destiny. Their chemistry on stage was electric. Off stage, it burned even brighter. Audiences adored them. Critics called them the golden duo of modern symphony. But behind the curtain, jealousy and pride had begun to turn their harmony into dissonance. Ethan was older, already famous, and couldn't stand the growing applause Mia received. Her youth, her charm, her effortless command of the spotlight. It all reminded him that his brilliance was beginning to fade. By the winter of 2018, their relationship had curdled into quiet resentment. Rehearsals became arguments. Performances ended in silence. Still, the world saw only love and art until the night of February 3rd, when Ethan called 911 in a trembling voice and said, "She's dead. It was an accident." When officers arrived, Mia lay on the floor near the piano, her temple bruised, blood pooling beneath her hair. Ethan's explanation was vague. A fight, a slip, a fall. He claimed she'd tripped while they argued, struck her head on the corner of the instrument, and never woke up. But something about the scene felt staged. Detectives noticed there were no signs of forced entry, only shattered glass near the wine table and a single sheet of music lying face down on the piano. Its title, scrawled in Ethan's handwriting, read, "Nocturne for Two." The autopsy told another story. The blow to Mia's head wasn't consistent with the fall. It was deliberate, a blunt force strike, clean and powerful. The pattern matched the edge of the marble wine decanter found near the sofa. A search of Ethan's computer revealed angry, obsessive messages, drafted emails he'd never sent. One read, "If she leaves, the music dies. And so do I." Another, darker still, "She doesn't deserve the stage. I made her." When detectives confronted him, Ethan broke his composure. She was going to destroy everything. he said. The tour, the sponsors, the music. I couldn't let her. In court, prosecutors painted him as a man consumed by ego, incapable of sharing the stage he once ruled. They presented text messages from Mia to a friend hours before her death. He's scaring me. He says if I walk away, the world will forget me. Ethan's defense tried to build a narrative of passion and tragedy, an artist undone by love and pressure. But the evidence was too precise, too cold. The bruises on Mia's wrists, the fractured decanter, the stage piano. The verdict came quickly, guilty of second-degree murder. As he was led away, Ethan looked back toward the courtroom gallery, where Mia's violin rested in its case. She was my music, he whispered. After the trial, her final performance, a recording of Vivaldi's Winter, was played in her honor at Carnegie Hall. The audience sat in silence, some swearing they could still feel her presence in every note. The apartment where it happened remains empty. The piano was removed, but neighbors say that on stormy nights, faint music drifts through the walls, soft, melancholic, and unfinished. Because even in death, some love stories refuse to play their final note. Case 4. The Roses of December. The house on Maplewood Lane still stands, perfectly ordinary, its garden trimmed and roses blooming red even in the dead of winter. But those roses hide a history that chills every neighbor who walks past. Beneath their roots once lay the secret of a love that turned so dark, it needed the earth itself to keep it quiet. Grace and William Morgan had been married for nearly 15 years. To anyone who knew them, they seemed unshakably content. Sunday picnics, holiday dinners, matching sweaters in their Christmas photos. William, a high school teacher, was patient and soft-spoken. Grace, a florist, ran a small shop that smelled perpetually of lilies and cedar. Together, they embodied the picture of suburban perfection. But perfection, as the detectives later said, is sometimes just good lighting. In December 2016, police received a missing person report from Grace's sister. She hadn't heard from her in weeks. William told everyone Grace had left him, that she'd grown restless, wanted to find herself. He showed friends a note in her handwriting. I need time away. Please don't follow me. The message was convincing, almost. But the sister noticed something odd. Grace never signed her full name on letters. This one did. Detectives visited the Morgans' home. William was polite, cooperative, even helpful. He brewed coffee for the officers and answered questions with measured calm. Everything in the house looked untouched, except the backyard. The garden, normally dormant in winter, had been freshly turned. And in the corner, the rose bushes glistened under frost, their stems newly planted, their roots sitting atop soil too recently disturbed. When asked, William smiled. Grace always said roses were her favorite, he replied. The next day, police brought cadaver dogs. Within minutes, they began to bark. Under the third rosebush, barely 3 feet down, officers uncovered plastic sheeting and the unmistakable outline of human remains. Grace Morgan's body was wrapped in one of her own floral blankets. Around her wrist was her wedding band, bent inward, the gold warped as if crushed by force. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head. Her time of death matched the day William had claimed she'd left. The motive unfolded like a tragic cliché: jealousy, debt, and control. Grace had discovered that William was having an affair with one of his former students, a woman 20 years his junior. When she threatened to expose him, he panicked. That night, during one of their last dinners together, a heated argument erupted. A single blow from a brass candlestick ended the conversation. What happened afterward was disturbingly methodical. William spent the night cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing tile grout, and composing the fake goodbye letter. The next morning, he bought 2 new rose bushes from Grace's own shop and planted them in the backyard, using the soil to cover what was left of his marriage. The trial that followed became national news. Every headline used the same phrase, the Roses of December. Prosecutors detailed how he'd lived in that house for weeks afterward, teaching by day, returning each night to water the garden. He kept her alive, one attorney said, through the only thing she ever loved, her flowers. William's defense painted him as delusional, claiming a psychological break caused by abandonment. The jury didn't need long. Guilty, first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. The Morgans' home was sold to a young couple 2 years later. They tore out the garden, but the roses grew back. Wild, invasive, impossible to kill. Locals say they bloomed deeper red each December. A neighbor once told a reporter, she used to say love was like a flower. It needs care, patience, and light. He paused, looking toward the yard where those roses still climb the fence. She never said what happens when love grows in the dark. Case 5. The photographer's secret. The photographs were beautiful. Too beautiful, some said. They captured love in its rawest, most intimate form. Hands intertwined, laughter frozen mid-breath, eyes that seemed to whisper secrets only the lens could hear. For nearly a decade, Adrian Cole had been the city's most sought-after wedding photographer. Couples booked him months, even years in advance. His images weren't just pictures, they were memories sculpted in light. But no one knew that behind every perfect frame, Adrian was composing something far darker. An obsession that would end not with a kiss, but with a scream. He met Jenna during a photo shoot in the summer of 2019. She was radiant, spontaneous, the kind of bride who made his camera feel alive. Her fiancé, Aaron, was quiet and practical, a software engineer with little interest in artistic detail. During their first session, Adrian barely looked at him. All his attention was on Jenna, her movements, her smile, the way the sun caught her hair. By the end of the day, he knew he wanted more than pictures. After the wedding, Adrian began texting her under the guise of sharing unedited shots. At first, the messages were professional, short, polite, harmless. But as weeks passed, they grew longer, more personal. You looked happiest when you weren't posing. You should see the ones I kept for myself. Jenna laughed it off. Aaron didn't. He told her to block the number. She did, but the photos kept arriving. New ones. Shots no one had ever seen, taken from angles that made her uneasy, as if she'd been watched. One night, Aaron checked their home security footage and froze. Adrian's car parked down the street, engine running, headlights off. They filed a restraining order. Adrian ignored it. His reputation began to crack. Rumors among clients, whispers in photography circles. When the harassment turned into threats, the police got involved. Still, there wasn't enough to arrest him. He was careful, too careful. Then, in October 2020, Jenna and Aaron vanished. Their families reported them missing after 3 days of silence. Police found the front door locked, their phones off, and Adrian's business card pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a heart. It read simply, "Let's make something beautiful." The next day, a fisherman discovered a partially submerged suitcase along the riverbank, about 30 miles north. Inside were Jenna's wedding dress, her veil, and a memory card wrapped in tissue paper. The card contained hundreds of photos, some from her wedding, others from hidden cameras. In the final set, time-stamped the night they disappeared, Jenna was bound to a chair in Adrian's studio. Aaron's reflection was visible in the background, his body slumped. When police raided Adrian's studio, they found it transformed into something unrecognizable. The walls were lined with portraits, dozens of couples whose weddings he had shot. But in every image, the brides' faces had been cut out and replaced with Jenna's. On the floor lay a journal, pages filled with fragmented sentences. "She smiles for me now. The light only obeys love." Adrian was arrested at an abandoned farmhouse 3 towns over, attempting to burn a hard drive. He confessed almost immediately, his voice calm and detached. He said he had immortalized love, that Jenna's death was a necessary ending for the art to last. Aaron, he claimed, had gotten in the way. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. He was convicted on 2 counts of murder and sentenced to death. When asked if he felt remorse, Adrian smiled for the cameras and said, "I already took the perfect shot." The studio has since been demolished, replaced by a small bookstore. Locals say that sometimes, when the lights flicker, shadows form on the wall that look like silhouettes holding hands. A detective who worked the case once said, "He spent his life capturing love, but he never learned what it really looked like." Because for some, love isn't about devotion. It's about possession, and that's the most dangerous frame of all. Case 6. The Promise Ring. It started as a teenage romance, the kind that fills journals and phone screens with hearts. 17-year-old Lily Thomas met Ben Holloway at a summer fair in rural Maine. Under strings of fading carnival lights and the slow hum of a carousel that would soon stop spinning forever. They were inseparable that summer. He was quiet, intense, older by 2 years. She was bright, hopeful, endlessly forgiving. When he gave her a silver promise ring on their 1-year anniversary, he told her it meant forever. She believed him. Everyone did. By the time Lily's 18th birthday came around, the cracks had already begun to show. Ben's texts turned controlling. His smiles, once tender, now came with sharp edges. He monitored her friends, her social media, even the routes she took to class. Her mother noticed the bruises first, faint marks along her wrist that Lily said were from a fall. In April 2021, Lily decided to leave him. She told her best friend she couldn't take the jealousy anymore, that she planned to return the ring and end things the right way. She never got the chance. That night, she met Ben at a park they used to visit, a small, wooded clearing by the lake. It was cold, the kind of night when sound travels far and footsteps echo on frozen ground. A jogger passing by around 9:15 p.m. later reported hearing shouting, followed by a single scream. When police arrived hours later, they found tire tracks near the water's edge and Lily's phone lying face down in the dirt. Her body was discovered 2 days later, half buried beneath leaves along a hiking trail. The promise ring was still on her finger, its silver band bent out of shape. Investigators traced her final messages, unsent drafts on her phone, and found one that simply read, "He's angrier than I've ever seen him. If I don't come back, tell my mom I tried." Ben denied everything. He cried during questioning, told officers she had run off after an argument, that he'd gone home and fallen asleep. But the evidence told a different story. Mud from the same hiking trail on his boots, a cut on his arm matching the pattern of Lily's broken necklace, and most damning of all, her blood found in the trunk of his car. When the police presented it, Ben stopped speaking. He stared down at the table for nearly a minute, then muttered, "She said forever." At trial, the prosecution painted a picture of obsession disguised as love. They showed the jury hundreds of texts, apologies, threats, desperate pleas. One message from weeks before the murder read, "If you leave, you'll regret it. I can't live without you, and I won't." The defense tried to claim it was a crime of passion, a momentary loss of control. But Lily's journal told the real story. Months of fear, of quiet warnings ignored. On one page, she had written, "I think he loves me too much." It's not love when you're scared. Ben Holloway was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. During sentencing, he asked to keep the promise ring as a reminder. The judge denied it. Today, that ring sits in an evidence box, tarnished and bent, a relic of promises that were never meant to be kept. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, her mother visits the lake where Lily took her last walk. She tosses a handful of wildflowers into the water and whispers, "You kept your promise. You got away." Because sometimes the dead don't need revenge, just release. Case 7. The fire beneath the vows the wedding had been perfect, the kind that belongs on magazine covers. A cliffside ceremony, a golden sunset, and 1,000 paper lanterns drifting into the night sky. Emily and Tom Bennett were the definition of picture-perfect love, beautiful, successful, and inseparable. But a year later, that same cliff would become the setting of something far more sinister. A house fire that revealed just how far one man would go to keep what wasn't his to lose. On January 11th, 2022, firefighters were called to the Bennett's coastal home after neighbors spotted flames tearing through the second floor. By the time crews arrived, the house was almost gone. Tom was outside, coughing covered in soot. He told them Emily was trapped inside. But when the smoke cleared, she wasn't there. They found her body 2 days later, not in the bedroom where he claimed she'd been, but in the basement, her wrists bound, the cause of death not smoke inhalation, but blunt force trauma to the skull. The fire had been set after she was already dead. Tom's story began to crumble instantly. He claimed it was an accident, a tragedy born from old wiring. But the fire inspectors disagreed. The accelerant used was gasoline, poured in deliberate lines along the staircase and near the fuse box. And then there was the life insurance. $3 million policy taken out just 6 weeks earlier. Emily's sister told investigators that Emily had been planning to leave him. She'd found messages between Tom and a woman named Claire, his co-worker, younger, newly divorced. He had promised to start fresh, once things with Emily were taken care of. Detectives found that text still on his phone, hidden in a deleted folder. The timeline grew darker with every detail. The night of the fire, Tom had driven to a nearby gas station, purchasing 2 gallons of fuel. Cameras caught him filling a portable container, then returning home around 11:40 p.m. 40 minutes later. Neighbors heard an explosion. When confronted, Tom broke down, claiming he just wanted a way out. He said Emily had threatened to expose his affair, to ruin his career, and take everything in the divorce. "I thought," he said quietly, "if I couldn't have peace, at least I'd have her gone." The prosecution called it premeditation, greed, and ego masquerading as desperation. They showed how he had rehearsed the story for weeks, creating fake receipts, telling co-workers Emily was acting erratic. He'd even Googled how to start a fire that looks electrical. The jury deliberated less than 5 hours. Guilty, first-degree murder, arson, and insurance fraud. During sentencing, Emily's father stood and addressed the court. His voice shook, but his words didn't. He said his vows in front of God, promised to protect her. And then he lit the match. The charred remains of the Bennett home were bulldozed months later, but locals say the land still smells faintly of smoke when the wind changes. The cliffside where they once stood to say, "I do," has become a quiet memorial, flowers, photographs, and a single burned wedding band embedded in the earth. Firefighters who worked that night say they can still picture the flames, how they twisted in unnatural patterns, like a heart being consumed. Because when love turns to obsession, the fire doesn't stop at the house. It burns through the soul. Case 8. The pianist's widow. The stage was empty, except for a single grand piano gleaming beneath the spotlight. The concert had been scheduled for that night, a charity performance dedicated to the memory of composer Victor Lang. But when the curtains opened, there was no music, only whispers. Victor's widow, Clara, sat in the front row wearing black, her face hidden behind a veil. No one in the audience knew that hours before, she had confessed to killing the man whose music the world adored. Victor Lang was brilliance personified. A concert pianist turned composer, he'd filled symphony halls and headlines alike. His love story with Clara, a rising opera singer, was legendary. 2 artists, 2 souls entwined by music. Their marriage was a fixture of elegance and tragedy, their duets haunting and intimate. But beneath that harmony lay dissonance, infidelity, control, and cruelty. In public, Victor was charming. In private, he was a tyrant. He dictated Clara's performances, criticized her weight, her voice, even her gestures. He controlled her finances and silenced her career when she tried to branch out. To the world, she was his muse. To him, she was his property. Friends describe how her light dimmed year by year, how she spoke less, smiled rarely, and only came alive on stage when he wasn't there. On the night of March 5th, 2020, after yet another argument about a tour Clara wanted to accept without his approval, neighbors heard shouting. Then silence. The next morning, police found Victor slumped over the piano bench, a half-empty glass of brandy beside him. His death was initially ruled a heart attack until the toxicology report came back. The brandy contained crushed sedatives mixed with belladonna, deadly nightshade, the same flower Clara had often worn in her hair during performances. When questioned, she didn't deny it. "I only wanted him to sleep," she told detectives. "He'd been drinking, I didn't think he'd take that much. But investigators found handwritten notes in her vanity drawer, drafts of letters that read more like confessions. If freedom cost me his life, so be it. The evidence painted a picture of a woman pushed beyond endurance. Victor had rewritten her contracts, hidden her earnings, and once, after an argument, locked her in their music room overnight to calm down. Her friends had begged her to leave. She'd always answered, "He's my husband. He just gets lost in his art." The prosecution sought second-degree murder, arguing premeditation. But the public and the press saw something else, a victim reclaiming her voice after years of silence. Every headline became a debate between justice and survival. In court, Clara's defense attorney played one of Victor's recordings, a piece titled "For My Beloved." It was beautiful, tragic even. But then he read aloud the dedication on the original sheet music, found in Victor's handwriting, "To the woman who will never sing again unless I allow it." Gasps filled the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the end, Clara Lang was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. When the verdict was read, she stood tall, eyes unblinking, and whispered, "It's finally quiet." After her sentencing, a reporter asked if she regretted it. Her reply became infamous. Every note he ever wrote was about control. "This was my final performance, and I ended on my own key." Victor's piano was donated to the conservatory where they'd first met. No one plays it anymore. Students say it emits a faint hum when the hall is empty, as if some unfinished melody still lingers. Because sometimes love doesn't fade into silence. It composes its own ending. Case 9. The nurse who loved too deeply. The hospital at night is a strange place, quiet, almost sacred. Machines hum like distant lullabies, and the world feels suspended between life and death. To most nurses, that stillness is comforting, a moment to breathe. But for her, it became the soundtrack to obsession. Her name was Diane Keller, and for 15 years she'd been known as one of St. Joseph's most devoted nurses. Patients loved her, doctors trusted her. She stayed long after shifts ended, brought flowers to recovering patients, remembered birthdays and names. To anyone watching, she was the perfect nurse. But perfection can hide a sickness no medicine can treat. It began when she met Dr. Aaron Miles, a respected cardiologist, married with 2 children. He was brilliant, the kind of man who noticed details others missed. To Diane, that attention felt like oxygen. She started bringing him coffee during rounds, volunteering for his night shifts, and finding excuses to be near him. When he thanked her one evening for always being there, she mistook it for something more. Soon, her text turned personal. "You look tired tonight. You should let me take care of you." He ignored it. Then came flowers left in his office, a note taped to his locker. Small gestures at first, sweet, almost harmless, until he told her to stop. That's when the kindness turned into something else. Over the next few months, Aaron began finding anonymous letters at his home, typed and unsigned, filled with details only someone close to him could know. Where his wife shopped, where his children went to school. He reported it quietly to hospital security. They couldn't prove anything, but everyone suspected Diane. Her devotion had turned cold, her smiles forced. Then, in November 2017, Aaron's wife collapsed at home after dinner. She was rushed to the same hospital where her husband worked. The diagnosis: acute poisoning. Traces of digoxin, a cardiac drug, were found in her system. Someone had slipped it into her tea. She survived barely. 2 days later, Aaron found a small white envelope in his locker. Inside was a pressed flower and a note. "Now you're free." Security footage revealed Diane entering the staff locker room around midnight the night before. When police searched her apartment, they found vials of digoxin, patient wristbands, and a scrapbook, not of patients or friends, but of Aaron. Every page was filled with photographs, articles, even family pictures she'd printed from social media. When confronted, she didn't deny it. Her explanation was chilling in its simplicity. "I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted him to love me the way I loved him. Investigators later discovered she had been using hospital supplies for months, collecting small doses from discarded medication, waiting for the right time. The right time, it turned out, was the night Aaron's wife posted a family picture captioned "Forever Us." In court, her defense tried to argue diminished capacity, that she suffered from erotomania, a delusional belief that someone was secretly in love with her. The prosecution countered with precision, the planning, the method, the manipulation. The jury saw no confusion, only control. Diane Keller was sentenced to 40 years in prison. During sentencing, she turned to Aaron and said softly, "You'll think of me every time you hear a heartbeat." He never returned to that hospital. The staff removed her name from the recognition plaques and burned her old locker tags. But some nurses say that on the night shift, when the halls are empty and the monitors beep in rhythm, they sometimes hear footsteps, soft, deliberate, followed by the faint smell of hospital disinfectant and perfume. They say she still lingers there, walking the corridors she once ruled, listening for the heart that never beat for her. Because love, when twisted by obsession, doesn't heal, it infects. Case 10. The poet's goodbye. The letter was found on a mahogany desk overlooking the sea. 4 pages of flowing script, the ink still wet when police arrived. It wasn't a suicide note, though it began like one. It was a love letter, signed with the words "yours until the silence takes us both." And at the bottom of that page was the name Evelyn Price. She'd been a muse of poet and novelist Daniel Ward, one of the most celebrated writers of his generation. His books, tragic, romantic, dripping with melancholy, had made him a literary icon. Evelyn was his editor, then his lover, then his wife. Together, they were the envy of every arts circle in London. She the quiet, brilliant woman behind his words. He the tortured genius who made the world weep. But like every great romance built on suffering, there's had an expiration date written in ink long before either of them saw it. By 2019, Daniel's career had begun to crumble. His last novel had flopped. Critics called it self-indulgent, derivative, and worst of all, uninspired. Friends said he took it personally. Evelyn, ever pragmatic, encouraged him to rest, to step away from the spotlight. But to Daniel, stepping away meant fading into nothing. As his despair deepened, he grew paranoid. He accused her of sabotaging his work, of conspiring with publishers to bury his name. He began recording their conversations, writing about her in his journals, entries filled with rage, heartbreak, and obsession. In September of that year, Evelyn confided in a friend that she planned to leave him. She'd already packed a suitcase and booked a room in the city. "He's not the man I married," she said. "He's the story he's trying to write." She never made it to the hotel. The next morning, a neighbor reported hearing a scream from the couple's coastal home, followed by silence. When police arrived, Daniel was sitting on the veranda, staring out at the sea. "She's gone," he said. "She wanted peace, so I gave it to her." Inside, they found Evelyn lying beside his typewriter. The scene looked almost staged, candles half-burned, papers scattered like snow. The autopsy revealed she'd been poisoned, a lethal mix of sleeping pills and crushed foxglove, a flower Daniel had often referenced in his poems. The evidence was damning. A week earlier, he'd purchased the medication and the flowers from a local apothecary. In his study, detectives found drafts of what appeared to be a confession, a prose piece titled "The Last Gift." It described in haunting detail the act of freeing the beloved from the weight of this cruel world. During interrogation, Daniel refused to call it murder. "You call it death," he told investigators. "I call it devotion. She was my art, and art should never leave the artist." At trial, his defense leaned on mental illness, claiming he'd lost his grip on reality, that he saw her departure as symbolic rather than literal. But his own words destroyed that argument. The prosecution read excerpt from his notebook aloud. "If she walks away, the story dies. And I would rather write her into myself." The jury took less than a day. Guilty, first-degree murder. Daniel was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. His final published work, The Poet's Goodbye, became infamous posthumously, banned in several countries for romanticizing death. Inside the dedication page was a single line, "For E, who wanted peace." The seaside home was later sold to a retired couple. They left within months, telling reporters they couldn't stand the feeling that someone was still writing in the next room. Evelyn's ashes were scattered at sea, the same sea she'd once watched while editing his verses. Every year, a single bouquet of foxgloves appears on the rocks below that house, though no one ever sees who leaves them. Because when love becomes art, the line between beauty and destruction disappears, and only tragedy remains to finish the story.